I ended up last time by making the point that this period, this is the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and so forth of the first century CE, sees the beginnings of the rise of Christianity, which is a form of Judaism at the beginning, as I'm sure everybody's basically aware. They are the formative years of the new sect, the years it slowly moves from becoming a kind of Judaism into a religion of its own. This has to do with four basic features. It's an interesting story, and it tells you very much about what Judaism was like by looking at sort of like the alternative image. Four basic features of Judaism that were not so easy for Gentiles to swallow whole hog, if I can use that expression, in that era. And I'm referring, of course, as you can see over here, I can't see it, but you can, but you got universalism, particularism, monotheism, and messianism, all of which we're kind of basically familiar with. We may not frame it exactly in those terms, but you should. Now, the remarkable thing about the guy we talked about at the end of last time, the Senator Flavius Clemens, that's a true story. He was going to be the heir of the Caesar, of Domitian. And his kids, all of whom were killed at the last minute, is that these people were willing to become, here I go again, whole hog, they want to become fully Jewish, circumcised and all the rest of it, in spite of Judaism's particularism. They were not turned off by that. Judaism is, if you think about it, after all strange, in its combination of universalism and particularism. I mean, we believe Hashem is the God of everything, of everyone, there are no others. That's a message that resonates even with philosophical Romans. You won't believe this. Caligula, that nut, I'm sure many of you know who he was. If you read closely, you'll find at one point he orders the Jews in his time to put a statue of himself in the temple, and the Jews go crazy about it, and then he says, kill all the Jews. And then one of the Jews, Herod Agrippa, who's a friend of his, a fellow party animal, as they would say, and he writes him a letter and he said, listen, the Jews have an invisible God. It's beyond description, all the rest of it. And as a philosopher, you can see that point. And Caligula said, you're right, I hear that, which is kind of interesting. So, as I say, the notion that there's a single God that's in charge of everything is a message that resonates even with philosophical Gentiles, Romans. It plays to certain strains of philosophical and even healthy religious thought. On the other hand, the God of everything, who created everyone, has favorites. He has beloved sons, to whom he gives coats of many colors, and the others, for whom he feels far less affection. What a turnoff. No? It's called Judaism. Okay? The Rambam, in a famous letter called the Letter to Yemen, the Geras Talmud, puts it better than anyone else can, puts it very, very frankly. And he, in the Rambam's time, he lived in the 12th century in the Middle East. And one of the things that happened over there was a certain wave of Islamic religious persecution in Yemen. And so he's writing to them about it. And he's trying to be mechazik them, strengthen them in their Judaic beliefs. And he says, you should know, number one, that the Torah given us is true. The greatest of all the prophets gave it. In other words, Moses, not Muhammad. Torah hazos, you have to understand something, my friends who are living under conditions of Islamic persecution in Yemen. You got to understand one thing. Torah hazos, by giving the Jews the Torah and not giving the others the Torah. He's separating them out for special mention from all the other nations. It's not because we were racially superior. The Rambam isn't into that. Some other Jewish authors were. The Rambam is not. It's not because we're racially superior. It's because of God's chesed, because of his kindness, and the fact he wanted to bestow good upon us, because he owed our parents. Because of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Oh, you're so-and-so's grandson? I remember when I first came to this country, he lent me a good, that kind of thing, right? Shen Nemar, and he has psukim to back it up. And if you buy into the story, then since God special or separated us out, he was miyachid us, through giving us and not others these laws, his laws, and by there he demonstrated our superiority because he said, I'm giving you the coat of many colors. I'm giving you the laws, the chukim and the mishpatim and all the other things and not the others. All the other nations got very jealous and angry at us ever since then. And their leaders, their kings, as he puts it, have from time immemorial, on account of this, tried to unleash against us hatred and anger. And unfortunately, for them, they don't succeed because it's God's plan. What can you do about it? They're around like a superiority of a Jew. I get it. That's a turnoff if you're not Jewish, agreed? Yeah? There's a certain racism, or you could view it that way. I'm simply bringing this out. Now let's put us in the year 70 or 80 or 90 or whatever of the Common Era. And now you have these Jews going around saying, Jew, 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 Jew. And let's say you're not Jewish. There are certain aspects of Judaism which you turn on. But on the other hand, certain aspects that turn off. You got to say it. And so as I say before, this God has, certain favorites. And no child ever likes it. The brothers of Joseph didn't like it when they gave him the special coat. And it's a famous chazal, to be perfectly honest. There's a famous statement in the Talmud which says, Har Sinai, Mount Sinai, is sinah. Sounds like hatred, and you understand what that means. The anti-Semitism begins with Shavuos. It's a happy thought. Now, while there were certainly many who quite remarkably converted to Judaism in spite of this particularism, I mean, that's really a ger tzedek. A person says, I'm willing to come in as a second-class person, and I'm grateful you're taking me on board and all the rest of it. It is also true that during this time, there were many who were attracted to certain aspects of Judaism, but who were repelled by its racism and would not convert. They might come to shul, and did. They might listen appreciatively to the Torah readings in Greek with its edifying messages, especially when explained by the Maturgamon. I mean, if you have a rabbi friend explaining the Parsha of the week, and he's talking in Greek language, not using yeshiva language, so anybody can understand it, and you talk about Pinchas, right, and Balak, and these are universal. If you know how to do it, they're universalistic. So people might like to come and hear that, but these people who would show up in the synagogue would not renounce their own nationality and customs. They would not, like Ruth, say, your people is my people, meaning my former people are no longer mine. It's a lot to ask from someone. So these are fundamental tensions that characterized the exotic place of Judaism and its synagogues throughout the Roman Empire. You just got to understand this. The Roman elite, in particular, resented this particularism. Because after all, we're the best. What are you taking my job for? The Roman elite were offended by the fact that a race that had been conquered, a race that had showed itself to be politically incompetent, a race whose personal manners, what shall we say, turn off, should nevertheless exercise a fascination on its conquerors, even upon members, as we've seen, of the imperial family. I mean, you can just imagine a little bit what it's like. How can you continue to be so religiously arrogant after you've been crushed and the temple of your God has been destroyed? Such arrogance is insufferable. What they really mean is this arrogance is reserved only for us. A perfect example of this Roman resentment, and I've read it many times in different audiences, is found in the writings of Tacitus, the most famous the Roman senator, who wrote exactly at this time, in the 80s and the 90s, precisely at the time we're speaking about. He's the most famous Roman historian, a member of the upper class, upper crust, so he went to what we would call today Harvard and Cambridge and Yale and so forth, the best of the best, and all the Latin people, if you remember, from high school or wherever, you got to read Caesar Wars and you got to read Tacitus, okay? Those are the classics. So anyway, but he was a senator. He wasn't Jewish. And he's the most famous of Roman historians. And he writes about, and he lived, like I say, he wrote this not long after the Churban Beis HaMikdash. He writes about the Jews. And what does he know about the Jews? And he wasn't Jewish, of course. So he knows what he heard. And what has he heard? Let me read you a piece from here, very famous. It's always very often quoted and kind of cute because it represents, like the game of telephone, you know, if I tell you who's this person and you heard from somebody, otherwise known as shidduchim, you know. Being now, and it's, of course this is in this good old classic Latin and translated in the 18th century, so we have two independent clauses constantly connected by semicolon. I love this stuff. You know, he says, being now about to relate the catastrophe of the celebrated city of Jerusalem, it seems fitting I should unfold the particulars of its origin. The Jews, we are told, escaping from the island of Crete at the time when Saturn was driven from his throne, settled in extreme parts of Libya. So that's who we are. We're Cretans. That's C-R-T-A-N. Okay? We're Cretans. Well, I want to tell you something. It's fun always to play a detective. How are we from Crete? The answer is the Philistines are. The Palestinians are. It says in the Chumash. Kaftarim. Okay? And so it's got a little, bingled along the way. The name is adduced as proof because there's a well-known mountain in Crete called Ida. And so the neighboring Idians are called the Eudeans, and they called the Judeans, and there you get it. So that's one theory. It's a theory. Some say that the population overflowing throughout Egypt in the reign of Isis was relieved by emigration into the neighboring countries under the conduct of Risolimus and Judah, of Jerusalem and Judah. These are the two Jewish leaders. That's kind of true. There was a big population of Jews in Egypt at one time. There's a story to it, but there's a population of Jews there, and they were they were relieved by emigration into the neighboring countries. Right? They weren't exactly led by Jerusalem and Judah, but what the heck? Many state that they're the progeny of the Ethiopians. Interesting. Who were impelled by fear and detestation to change their abode in the reign of King Siphius. So here we have an ancient report of the Jews originating from Ethiopia. There are those who report that they were a heterogeneous band from Assyria, from Ashur. That's actually true. Our forefathers come from Ur-Kasdim, from Ashur, from Iraq. We're all Iraqis here, right? And a people who, being destitute of a country, made themselves master of a portion of Egypt and subsequently settled in cities of their own in the Jewish territories and the parts bordering on Syria. Others, ascribing to the Jews an illustrious origin, say that the Solamai, Solamai, who were celebrated in Homer, called the city they built Rissolima after their own name. So we're refugees from the Trojan Wars. Okay? So the point is like this. He doesn't know who the Jews are, nor does he care that much. He just reports what people say at parties. Right? When they have them up together. The problem is, these are the decision makers in Rome. Okay? And so what's the nature of the accuracy of their information? To be perfectly honest, how much did we know when we got in Vietnam? To be perfectly honest, how much did we know very recently when we got in Iraq? How much do we know even today what's really going on in Afghanistan? Yeah, I'm talking about the decision makers. There's always the few eggheads and intellectuals that actually know what they're talking about. But the people that do all the decision making, I don't know. True. I'll ask you about, which I won't. What's really the nature of these concepts? We don't know. And so, very many authors agree in recording that pestilential disease, which disfigured the body in a loathsome manner, spread over Egypt. Bacchus being the king, he went to the oracle of the god Jupiter at Hammon in request of a remedy, was directed to purify his kingdom and exterminate the race of men as being detested by the gods. So this is the old Greek argument. I've spoken about this elsewhere, where you didn't leave Egypt, you were thrown out. You were thrown out because of public health menace. That's what the Egyptians put out after the Septuagint. That a mass of people searched out and collected together were in a wild and barren desert abandoned to their misery. When all of them, bathed in tears and torpid with despair, Moses, one of the exiles, admonished them not to look for any aid from gods or men, being deserted by both, but to trust themselves to him alone as a heaven-sent guide, by whose aid they had already warded off the miseries that beset them. They agreed, and they commenced the journey not knowing where they were going, and next thing you know, they're all stuck with a lack of water, and they're dying of thirst in the desert. And Moses, he goes on to say, finds some water in a rock, in a little oasis or something like that, and that's how they do it, and they march off, and a few days later, they take over Israel. Right? It's a certain version of the story. But it's like telephone. In other words, you recognize parts of it. Okay? This is true, by the way, with all kind of propaganda, even today. And the anti-Semitic propaganda, anti-Israeli propaganda, we see pieces of it. It's just how you put it together that makes it toxic. Anyway, here's the point. This is Tacitus writing. In order to bind the people from all time to come, Moses prescribed for them a new form of worship opposed to all the world besides. This is absolutely true. Whatever is held sacred by the Romans, with the Jews is profane. And what is in other nations unlawful and impure, with them is permitted. The figure of the animal, through whose guidance they slaked their thirst and were enabled to terminate their wanderings, which was an ass, is consecrated in the sanctuary of their temple, because it was a very commonly wide belief that in the Kodesh HaKadoshim is a golden donkey with a boy on it, all made out of solid gold. It's a very famous story. The Kusim put this out in the beginning, and it's very well known. Plutarch, I think, said, or Josephus, that when Pompey, the famous Roman general, captured the base of Migdash the first time, this is not when they destroyed it, it's in 63 or so, they're about 62 BCE, time of Julius Caesar, he ran to the high priest and says, where's the golden ass, where's the golden donkey? And he could barely persuade him that it was a legend. But here you are 100 and some years later, and he said, oh, everybody knows that. While in contempt of Jupiter Hammon, they do sacrifice the ram, all of which is true. We believe the carbon Pesach Yeshech, the god of Egypt. The ox, worshipped in Egypt for the god Apis, is slain as a victim by the Jews. They abstained from the flesh of swine. Now, why did he do that? A Roman couldn't understand that. I mean, that's the easiest meat. It must be from the recollection of the loathsome affliction which they had formerly suffered from leprosy, to which the pig is often subject. Okay? So they turned the fact that the Jews don't eat pork to the fact that everybody knows the Jews are leprous, dirty, scumbags. You know what's next to a Jew. Very common in the Roman writings. Jews are uchi. The famine, for which they went a long time distressed, is still commemorated by frequent fastings that they also couldn't understand. Why would people actually voluntarily fast? Plus, it was a common Roman belief, incorrect, that Shabbos is a fast day. It just happens to be. Other Romans didn't think that way, but many did. And the Jewish bread made without leaven is a standing evidence to their stealing of corn on the way out of Egypt. Okay? This is, I know we laugh. This is how they condescend. They look down upon the Jews. Flavius Clemens would join that junk. This Roman dignitary or that one would even be interested in this. You get it? But they are. They say they instituted a rest on the seventh day because that brought them rest from their toils. But afterwards, charmed with the pleasures of idleness, the seventh year too was devoted to sloth. Well, you got Shemitah, don't you? Can you imagine to a Roman or anybody, the farmer's just sitting there all Shemitah year doing nothing? It doesn't compute. You get it? The Romans can only say Jewish religion, insane. Okay? The same thing we say about someone else, so they say about us. Others allege that this is an honor given to Saturn because the religions that were handed down by the Achaeans and Saturn and so forth. These rituals and ceremonies, howsoever introduced, have the support of antiquity. Now, these are old institutions, and to a Roman, to a Greek, anything that's been around for a long time, no matter how weird, deserves respect on account of its antiquity. There are other institutions which have been extensively adopted. Too many non-Jews picking this stuff up. Their other institutions are tainted with execrable knavery. For the scum and refuse of other nations, renouncing the religion of their own country, or in the habit of bringing gifts and offering to Jerusalem, hence the wealth and grandeur of the state. There you got it. How could people fall for this? And because faith is inviolably observed and compassion is cheerfully shown towards each other, while the bitterest animosity is harbored against all others. The Jews stick together as a clan. They have to cheat everybody else. They eat and lodge with each other only. And though a people of unbridled lust, admit no intercourse with women from other nations. So you can't win, If you do this, among themselves, no restraints are imposed. Okay? So he's got quite but look, he was a great writer. You can't take it away. Just from the literary point of view, the guy's doing a good job. That they may be known by a distinctive mark, they've established a practice of circumcision, which is interesting. The Romans definitely couldn't figure out that. Well, that's barbaric. We'll see later on. That's one of the reasons that provokes the Bar Kokhba rebellion, actually, in time of Hadrian. The Romans and the Greeks saw circumcision as just nuts, you understand? Unless medically indicated. But otherwise, it's crazy, and it can only be a mark of distinction in the worst possible way, meaning you're inferior. We're to circumcise, you're not members of the club. They're kind of right about that. That is sort of like what the Torah says. You see? And so once again, I emphasize the point that if someone were not Jewish, it's totally understandable that they'd be turned off by all this. All who embrace their faith must submit to the same operation. The first thing they instill into their converts is to despise the gods, abjure their country, and set at naught parents, children, and brothers. It's like you hear nowadays. The guy became frum, they cut the whole family off. Okay? They show concern, however, for the increase of their own population, since it's forbidden to put any of their brethren to dead, and it goes on and on about all these kinds of, so I don't need to read anymore, I made my point. You can read it sometimes yourself, it's probably online, I'm sure it is. Because these are classics, meaning these are statements that have been endlessly repeated by scholars down the ages. And I simply share it with you because if you want to know what the Romans think of these weirdos, then this is it. And then imagine what it is to a Roman who truly was the ruling power, who truly was the ruling race. And the Roman literature, especially at this time, this is right after Augustus, when the Romans were on top, you have all these famous Roman writers who say Rome has given the world law and order and domination and this and that and the other. So why are you giving it to the Jews? How come there's no Mishigas that everybody wants to become an honorary Libyan, an honorary Gaul, an honorary Briton? Why the Jews? You see? If you think that's not good enough, how about try Juvenal? You ever have to learn that in high school and college? The famous satirist Juvenal, who he's always writing the satires. He can't stand the Jews, can't stand the people in Rome who are adopting Jewish customs. He's writing about this lousy scene of a poor Jewish family on Friday night. It's cool. He says, look, I have it in front of me. You can read it on the screen. Some have had a father some have a father like this, and some have a father like that. He's making fun of them. And some who have a father who reveres the Sabbath, worships nothing but the clouds, because there's no idols. He can't understand. So to him, they're worshiping the clouds. And the divinity of heavens, which to him is ridiculous. In other words, the Jew will stand there and look up to Shamayim and pray that way. And the Romans are, who are you talking to? Here's the statue. What are you looking up there for? And see no difference between eating swine's flesh, from which their fathers abstained, and that of man. No, they think eating a pig is like being a cannibal. How ridiculous. And in time, they even take the circumcision. Why would a Roman do that? Now, you understand? I'll repeat. He's talking about Romans who are Judaizing. Having been wont to flout the laws of Rome, they learn and practice and revere the Jewish law. That's terrible. And all that Moses committed to his secret tome, forbidding to point out the way to anyone not worshiping the same rites. That's ridiculous, but that's how he understands it. And conducting none but the circumcised to the desired fountain. What's this business? They go to mikveh and all. What's that all about? For all which the father was to blame, who gave up every seventh day to idleness, keeping it apart from other concerns of life. So basically what he's saying, I'll tell you what I'll translate. The father, a generation earlier, was a semi-Judaizer. He adopted a couple of Jewish customs. But he was a Roman. And so he went to shul sometimes, started keeping Shabbos, sort of. The kids took it too far. They circumcised, they come totally from, They only conduct fellow members to the fountain. They keep the law. They abstain from swine's flesh. They're, like they say there, Meshuggah from. You see? And he, as a Roman, is complaining about this. So it's a bitter satire. Or if you wish, try Perseus. Again, a very famous Roman satirist from exactly this time. These guys are writing in the 70s and 90s. And what does he say? He's forget about sleep. So the old man came around for the day. Who is answering that? Or when the days of Herod the Jew are here. That's what he calls Shabbos, Friday night. He can't stand it. He walks in the neighborhood. He sees Roman families with Friday night meal. And the lamps wreathed with violets. Poor family, they can't afford the fancy stuff. And so Shabbos candles, but you want to do a little, what's the right word? Hider mitzvah? Wreathed with violets, set in the greasy window, vomit oily vapor. And the tunny fish, the tuna fish, tail swims, encircling the red bowl. So you want fish on Friday night. Encircling the red bowl, while the white jug brims with wine, and you move your lips silently, grown pale at the Sabbath of the circumcised. The Roman sees the Jew going, making kish, doesn't understand what he's saying, or he just sees the lips moving, and the whole thing is such a profound turnoff. And it's invading Rome itself, let alone the areas of the empire. This is just terrible. And so, if you want to understand the social history of the population of the Roman Empire, of 40 to 50 million people, we have to see that there did exist a large population at this time of believing pagans, yes, but also a large population of what I call half-pagans. Now the common term, as I'm sure we all know, unfortunately, is half Shabbos. And you all know what I'm talking about. Kids are texting on Shabbos. It's the newest thing. So I can't believe nobody knows what I'm talking about. You're all liars. Anyway, you you keep what you want to keep, being kids from religious families, but they keep something, they don't keep another. It's a common feature of our times, or increasingly so. And that was the same thing at that time with the Gentiles. Yeah, except they're half pagan or half Jewish. In other words, they're in the middle. This in the middle group is huge, growing very much. There was, in general, a general crisis of paganism, dating back to Alexander the Great and really back to Socrates. The old Greek religion of Zeus and everything worked for Greece for a long time. People believed in it, 100%, 90%, but they believed in it basically, and it gave the Greeks a cultural context and a structure in life. It promoted law and order, family, in the way they saw it, duty to the state, patriotism, culture. And you weren't supposed to ask the question, how do you know it's true or not? That you're not supposed to do. Then comes along this jerk named Socrates. He starts asking the question, how do you know it's true? And he popped the balloon, or he began the process of popping the balloon, for which, of course, they killed him. As they say, he corrupted the youth of Athens. Because they said, how do you know? How do you know? Why? Prove it. And this launched the whole enterprise of what we call classical Greek philosophy. Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, the people come after that, who really are atheists in the sense that they don't believe in the Greek gods. They say you want to, use them in state ceremonies. That's okay, as long as. But we philosophers know better. You see, well, that kind of skepticism, popped up right before Alexander the Great conquered Greece. He crushed Greece and then spread the Greek culture throughout the Middle East, the Persian Empire of 127 provinces, which Alexander, as we know, conquered. And his successors, who were called the Hellenistic sovereigns, presided with dictatorial states. There were dictatorships like North Korea over Egypt and the Syrian Empire, huge territories. And the problem was, after a while, didn't take too long, till increasing numbers of pagans started to say, is this real or not? They heard from the philosophers that's baloney. They heard from others as baloney. When the kings call themselves, like Antiochus, I'm a god, it gets triple baloney. When you see that the state religions are all about form and have no religious content, and the corruption of the priest and all the rest of it, this spread all throughout the pagan world. Now, there were plenty, I don't want to overstate the case, there were plenty of people that's very comfortable with the old-time religion, thank you very much. But there were plenty that weren't, increasingly so. And so we find that philosophy, for example, thought in general became weakened because the culture and the religion became weakened. And generally in history, when a religion becomes weakened, it's not replaced by a better religion, it's usually replaced by cults and weirdisms. That's generally the way it goes. Because the religion means it's been around for a long time, and over the course of being around for a long time, it's learned to adapt to human needs and foibles, shall we say. You understand? You sinned, don't do it again, come back tomorrow, right? In Judaism, they do teshuvah. The Catholics will say this way, the Protestants say that way, the Muslims say another way. But nobody says, oh, you sinned, it's all over. Cults aren't like that. If I say burp and you don't burp, well, you get killed. Jim Jones, things like that. And so this became very common in the Hellenistic era, as we call it, and was still common at the time that the Roman Empire spread into the Middle East and took it over. A lot of Egyptian-type ideas become popular. The Egyptians are full of mystical and magical kinds of notions, very, very un-Jewish to us. I'll return to that a little bit later. And in this era, some people began looking for alternatives, especially intelligent people. But sometimes even poor people, because let's face it, if you're poor and you have a lousy life and you're a slave or a maid or something like this in those days, where's it going? They don't believe in a heaven. Where's it going? You said, well, it's not going anywhere. This is the best you get. Well, I want to see another doctor, and let me try another religion. And so like I mentioned last week, increasingly numbers of Gentiles end up going into this. Some go into Egyptian cults, and that was very popular. And some go into extremist types of Neo-Pythagoreanism, what they call it, which had Egyptian roots. That would be your monks and your nuns, and those who renounce, life, so to speak. in favor of pure contemplation. Others went the exact opposite route and go into total partyism. And so that's Epicureanism and things like that, in which case the whole point of life is to grab as much pleasure as you can before you get old. And sometimes it gets into ecstatic behavior in which you want to touch God by going and have wild, crazy dances, and so your soul jumps out of the body, can then have contact with the greater spirit out there, and so through the ecstatic, practices, you'll exit, you'll exit and touch, shall we say, nirvana or something like that. And sometimes it's the other way around, as we'll see, ends up being very popular, in which you want to grab the spirit out there and hold it close to you. All kind of crazy things were going out there. One of the alternatives, it's like a bazaar, with 30 or 40 different offerings. One of the alternatives, just one, Judaism. Wasn't the only one. It's Judaism. You came to a Jewish community in Rome, in Athens, in Alexandria, in Naples, in Marseille, in Spain, and what do you see? Some it's a turn off, some it's a turn on. It's usually a small community, it's a family structure, it's law and order, it's a sense of right and wrong, it's a simple explanation for the origins of the universe. It's a pretty simple and makes sense explanation of what happens life after death. There's none of these issues that you find in the other cults. The religion, even though Judaism can be made to look very weird, it can also, you see, when you go there, I'll give you an example. Shabbos definitely looks weird to somebody. Not when you live it. Would you agree with that? Kind of makes sense. You tell someone from totally outside, strictly from a book, can't do this, can't do that, can't drive a car, can't read a telephone. It sounds all crazy. Can't tie the shoes. It's all crazy. But then when you go and you see people that live it, you say, you end up writing a book like, what's his name, Lieberman. Yeah, he said it makes sense. And so certain people, increasing number of people, attracted to the Jewish communities, compared to the stories of Homer, the stories of the Torah, especially when presented and the way they were, like I say, by the Rabbi Franz at that time, the Maturgimans, makes a lot more sense. There's no question about right or wrong. No question about what's to do, what not to do. No, none of these gods running around like Zeus and other, shafting somebody, taking someone else's wife, playing with people. All right? So it's attractive, or it could be. So there was a general crisis of paganism, and Judaism was one of the alternatives that were available out there. Of those who looked at Judaism, some swallow it whole hog. There were plenty of people, even the senators like we talked about last week, like Clemens, who said, I want to be 100% Jewish. Tell me how to convert. I want to sign up. I'm just changing my life, like Ruth of old. I'm changing my life. Others are into selective appropriation. Selective appropriation, like Americans. Okay? What I'm trying to say is that there arose two groups of people, those who totally converted and utterly transformed themselves, and those who did not, who could not make up their minds. The three most blatant markers in those days: circumcision, kashrus, Shabbos. Naturally. Circumcision, painful operation if you're an adult. Also, as we saw from Tacitus, a rather disturbing marker of identity with Jews and of severing ties with Gentiles, severing ties with one's own family. This is turn off. Many are not prepared to take this radical step. Makes 100% sense. Kashrus. Well, we saw a lot of people are into challah and tuna fish on Friday night. We just saw from Juvenile. Meaning, I'm not prepared to give up McDonald's, but I do like the Jewish foods in the ritualistic ways. You understand? But like Americans, I want to keep kosher, I want to keep trev, I want to keep everything, And it becomes a marker of your commitment of whether or not you're really prepared to give up a cheeseburger, or what the Roman equivalent it was long ago. And some did and some didn't. Shabbos. Everyone, we have records of this. You see people complaining. Everyone always liked parts of Shabbos, but they didn't like the restrictions. Right? Everybody liked the services. Everybody liked the Torah readings. And everybody liked the general idea of taking a day off in the family context, with the whole family there, not the kids running away somewhere else. And that doesn't mean they're into bishul, borer, schita, and all that kind of stuff. That takes a lot of commitment. What they want is a half Shabbos. And some of the more liberal Jews in those days are okay with this. They might be accepted as members of liberal communities. When I say liberal communities, in Rome or places like that, could be that there are communities where they say if a guy's willing to keep half Shabbos, half this, and another, we accept you. That's a gerus. You're full member of a Jewish community. Other communities, oh my God, more right-wing. They say, oh no, that doesn't count. He didn't do what he needs to do. They might not be accepted in frummer communities. Very much like today. The very frum don't like this at all. They see too many of these new people who haven't really made a commitment. Coming into shul, becoming members of the community, voting in the elections, doing all that sort of thing. And they look around at the typical first century synagogue in, say, Greece or Italy, and they compose the following prayer on Shabbos. Maybe you've heard about it before. God did not bequeath the Sabbath to Gentiles. He didn't allow those who still continue to worship idols, because you like to go to shul on Saturday, but you also like to hear the opera in this church on Sunday. I didn't want it this way. Who says people who don't undergo circumcision, males, are permitted to rest on the Sabbath? This is wrong. Only to Jewish Jews. Only to seed of Jacob. What kind of polemic is that? What does that reflect? Who wrote that? In response to what? And then there are those who are half monotheistic. That's a little bit tricky, okay? Like I say, you might like the Jewish community's Sabbath, their Passovers. You might even like their idea of God. But you also like the idea of Mithra, a very popular god at that time, right? You also want to carry out the good luck charm, of Minerva, or of some local Egyptian deity, because my best friend, she couldn't have a baby, and then she got one of these, and then she got pregnant. Or this person was sick, and he got one of these things from Sparta, and it worked like a charm. And these Jews are saying, no, it goes. The monotheistic idea is not necessarily so easy for one raised in total paganism to accept in its pure form. Get it? I mean, to say there are a bunch of gods out there, but yours is the strongest, that is something that's more comfortable to a pagan mentality. There are other things out there, but the Jewish one is the most sublime. And the Jews are saying, no, there's nothing out there. It's all baloney, zero. He said, all those temples and all this religion and and the massive millions and billions it's all baloney. Hard to accept. You see? Hard to take in and, what's the right word? Assimilate within oneself. I mean, what was Gerus during this period? Conversion. There's no clear answer. Not during this period. At the most, we might have an idea, not really, what was happening at this time, maybe in Eretz Yisrael. And there, I don't want to go into a technical discussion over here, but anybody knows the Gemara Yevamos will know that Nehemiah says that, if anybody says he's Jewish, he's already Jewish. That's what happened in the time of Mordechai. Rabbi Me'ami Haaretz Mis Yahadim. After Purim, people just declared themselves Jewish, and they and they say, some interpretations are they were accepted, others not accepted. They're debating this in Israel. But I can basically guarantee you, we do not know what was going on halachically in those territories that are referred to in the Mishnah as Medina Siyam, where they don't do the din of Lishma. All the Gemara people will know I'm talking about. Meaning that lots of Jewish communities, lots of them, outside of Israel, scattered throughout the Roman Empire, and they don't know a lot of the laws of Judaism. So if they don't know the laws of Judaism, how are they converting anybody to Judaism? And the Talmud itself discusses cases, believe it or not, where someone was converted and the Beis Din never told him about Shabbos. Okay? Did they know? They didn't? Whatever. So it's a very fluid era, this period, this entire first century, and particularly after destruction of the temple. We have records of this sort of thing in the 70s, the 80s, 90s, exactly the period that I'm talking about now, and even past that. If this is true, you see the rise and spread, therefore, of that form of Judaism known as Christianity. Their natural population, their target population, were precisely the half Shabbos, half circumcised, half monotheistic population, which existed in so many places in the Roman Empire. To the half circumcised, Christianity said, you don't have to really physically circumcise, nearly only circumcise the heart. So you don't have to have an operation. To the half kosher, the new religion says what goes in your mouth is not important, what comes out of your mouth is important, as St. Paul tells us. To the half monotheist, Christianity offers, under the name of Judaism, a blurring of monotheism by a wide variety of manifestations. You could say Jesus was a God or he was not. There are different early Christian groups that battle this out. Don't go by what you know today, because that's the result of the Council of Nicaea and battles that went on in the 4th century and millions of people killed in the 5th century over these theological issues and things like this. We're not aware of the extremely wide variety of early Christianities, which the dominant churches later on defined as heresies, which in those days were not heresies to those who practiced them. But the point is, Christianity as a phenomenon presents a wide variety of manifestations. He was a God, he wasn't a God, he sort of was, he is a human, he's a half human, he's a different creature altogether. I'm not kidding when I say this. There were different, the monophysites and the historians and this and that and the other. Mary is his mother, she's not his mother, she sort of is his mother. No, what was the nature of the birth? What is it, now, in Judaism, this is like kind of weird, but it wasn't weird at all. It was the opposite weird to the population that I'm talking about. That actually was much more comfortable for them to discuss and speculate upon than the Jewish thing is, it's all baloney. They didn't feel comfortable with that. Ultimately, during this period and afterwards, Christianity survives and grows in the marketplace of ideas. I cannot stress too much the relevance or the idea of the marketplace, the market idea, the capitalist idea. In capitalism, success is defined in your market share. Agreed? That's a fact. Which requires the seller to do what? To adapt the product to the public. If you have a great product, but the public's not interested in buying it, guess what? This was not centrally or cynically directed by Christian headquarters. There was no such thing as that. It happened organically. It's the way Judaism spread kind of organically. It was a Jewish community here, and people talked to them, and some were turned on, some were turned off. You had early communities of Christians. They may have been Jews who considered them Christians, however they called it. And in Egypt or in Greece or here and there, and people talked to them, and they talked to them, and some people were turned on by ideas, some people turned off by ideas. But as missionary faith, and Judaism wasn't missionary, but the Christians were missionary from early on, you see, this kind of approach doesn't work, this kind of approach does work. There may be another Christian sect or group that doesn't have this attitude or this particular theological doctrine, but it works over here, and therefore it goes. And if it spreads, literally like the business model, it's really like capitalism. Matter of fact, one of the most, it's famous, notorious if you want, one of the most famous salesmen in American history, Bruce Barton, back in the 1920s, who was a good Christian, and one of the inventors of Wall Street, of Madison Avenue, wrote a book called The Greatest Salesman Who Ever Lived, the story of St. Paul. And he meant it well. I mean, in other words, he was a Republican capitalist. He was trying to show the early roots of capitalism, and he wasn't wrong in many respects. There are, as I mentioned before, a lot of Egyptian religious influences in the Roman Empire. Cleopatra. Well, long before she came along, there are lots of Romans who say, this one was sick and that was sick, and the Roman gods didn't do the trick, but we called an Egyptian priest or priestess or something like that, and we burned 3 cats and it worked, They did it. And so there's a lot of this flowing around, particularly in the eastern part of the Roman Empire, which was Greek-speaking, and ever since the time of Alexander the Great, had been a funny intermixture of Greek ideas with Egyptian ideas moving together, perhaps in a bastardized form, perhaps in other forms, and very, very, very common, very popular. Their syncretistic connection to Judaism was attractive to many. Now, not to some Jews, not to Jewish Jews. It would horrify a regular Jew, but it was the opposite to many people out there. What looked weird to a regular Jew looked just right to many a pagan who was looking for half Judaism with which he or she could feel comfortable. Mamish was a Goldilocks situation. Right? The Judaism is too much this, paganism is too much this, and this is just right. And it offered, most importantly, a half monotheism and a half particularism. The half monotheism came to crystallize around the notion of a trinity, eventually, that really was one at the same time, 3 in 1, 1 in 3. It may be weird to a Jew, but very comfortable to someone looking for just enough Judaism to have the benefits of monotheistic belief, like one transcendental, non-physical God, a just world, reward and punishment, ultimate purpose in life, but it was at the same time combined with comfortable notions of a God who can be swallowed and whose blood can be drunk, where idols and images are mutter and celebrated and even worshipped, and where belief replaces deeds, you do not have to do anything to go to heaven, you just have to believe. These are very popular, or they're proved historically to be very popular ideas. I can only say they're popular because a lot of people got into it. And these are things that Judaism, wasn't halfway about, and therefore didn't feel comfortable with these whole notions. The Egyptian idea is, as I said before, one of the famous Egyptian ideas is you're worried about the God shouldn't run away from you. So one way is to get an idol and hold it here, and one is to tie it around your neck, and one is to tie it around your heart, and that way nobody can grab it. But actually, somebody can grab it. The ultimate to this, which developed in Egypt long before the time of Alexander the Great, is to eat your God. That way, he becomes part of you, and nobody can take him away from you. Okay? I know it's strange to a Jew. But take yourself out of your glasses and put in the glasses of the people I'm talking about 2,000 years ago. What's interesting is, again, part of, as we know, of mainstream Christianity. You can't imagine, and it's the central ritual even today of Catholicism and certain other forms of Christianity, as we all know. And, to a Jew, you say, where'd you get that from? In other words, that's not another way of twisting something out of the Old Testament. But if you know the times in which they lived, it's one of those ideas that got out there that sold like crazy. And were very popular until the Protestant Reformation and even afterwards. Because Martin Luther and the others, without going into Christian theology, didn't reject the idea. They just said it doesn't happen literally, but it happens spiritually and physically. And so, this new combination is really spreading little by little all over not the Jewish world so much. It is in the Jewish world, but it's not so much in the Jewish world, it's in the half-Jewish world, if I can use that term, which was all over the place during this time, even though the temple was destroyed, even though Judea had been crushed, and even though this and that and the other. It's interesting that a guy like Flavius Clemens would be interested in Judaism. Early Christian scholars claim no, even though it says he was persecuted for Jewish belief, really was a Christian. Well, we'll never know. But it seems, based on you tie it together with the Gemara stories, that it was Judaism. Even more important than half monotheism was what I call half particularism. If you join up, you're a fully equal member. That's the message of Christianity. The fact that Jesus was Jewish is increasingly downplayed. He came to save everyone. And the fact that he was Jewish, as a fact, was just interesting, but not crucial. And this is a trend that develops and becomes fully crystallized in Christianity. This was different from classical Geirus, Jewish conversion, in which the Jewish ethnic element is basic. In Jewish culture, there were debates, actually, in the Mishnah and places like that. Can someone who's a Ger say Eloheinu v'Elohei Avosenu? Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov? Different opinions out there. The end is they say you can say it, but it goes to show you, but you just joined yesterday. You see? Who are you? And it's interesting that someone would be willing to sign up on these terms. There were, but you can understand if Christianity comes along, it's a much more attractive option. The Ger is becoming an adopted member of the family, which is a whole trip. In the new Christianity, this was not the case. You sign up, you're a full member. Actually, in this era, to be perfectly honest, it still was remnants of this. In the 70s, 80s, 90s, the early second century, there still was a rule in Christianity that Jewish Christians come before Gentile Christians. And you could only be a bishop, for example, for a long time if you were Jewish. But the trend was in the other direction, and not too long after Bar Kokhba Rebellion, they tossed that one. And this is well known in church history. But the internal dynamics of the market share, as I said before, were against all this kind of ethnicity and exclusiveness, is Jewish racism and all that. And after Bar Kokhba Rebellion, I told you all this stuff was dropped. Which leads us finally to the most complex and controversial piece of this pie, of this entire discussion, which is Messianism. Judaism not only involves a belief in God and the laws, the nomianism, the halachas, it also involves a very specific vision of the future. Correct? The Ram tells a basic. Now, you understand what I'm saying? One could be a philosophical monotheist, and that wouldn't necessarily make him Jewish. If you're Jewish, you not only believe that one God created the world and all that sort of thing, but you also believe there's going to be a better future one day, a utopia. Is Judaism a utopian religion? Darn right it is. Or are you tossing out all the Nevi'im and everything? This world is It's a utopian vision, forms a hinterland for everything we believe, to be perfectly honest, how we act. Obviously, we all know this world is terribly imperfect. I think everyone agrees to that. This cannot be the best that God can come up with. But one day, there will be a better world, a perfect world. The leader in this effort will be an anointed member of the house of David, Malchus Beis Dovid, who will be both victorious and righteous. More than that, well, the details were never spelled out exactly. Nevi'im speak in a way about it, it's unclear. They come in violence, they come in peace, it'll be literally the lion will lie down the limb, figuratively, I don't know exactly, different machlokas in the time of the Talmud, different machlokas ever since then, but it's going to be good. It's going to be some kind of utopia. One thing we know for sure, beginning around the year 70 or so, 70 years or so before the Churban Beis Hamikdash, before the destruction of the Second Temple, when the existential situation of the Jews in Israel was so bad and did not look to be getting better, the Messianic idea came to be more and more popular, with the result that many stepped forth and claimed to be Mashiach. This is recorded in Josephus as well as in other places. Really, in the 40, 50 years before the destruction of the Temple, when things were really, really bad, and we're stuck with the Romans, we're stuck with the corrupt governors that they have, we're stuck with the Herodian mafia. We got to do something about this, but you can't do anything about it. The cards are stacked against you. God is going to help us. How's it going to help us? True, we can't defeat Rome through natural means, al derech hateva, but we will find a leader that heaven will send who will enable us to defeat Rome miraculously. Shlo al pi derech hateva. It will happen. If you don't believe it, you're of little faith, you're a coward, and so forth. You look at Suetonius, I think we have over there, right? Is that it? An ancient, Suetonius, who again writes in right after the death of Domitian, he says, an ancient superstition was current in the East, that out of Judea would come the rulers of the world. This prediction is later referred to two Roman emperors, Vespasian and Titus. That's his explanation. But the rebellious Jews who read it as referring to themselves murdered their procurator, routed the governor general of Syria when he came to restore order, and captured an eagle, which was a big insult to Rome. To crush this, they needed a strong, energetic commander, and this fell on Vespasian. Meaning even Suetonius, who's a Roman, knew about the messianic predictions that are coming out of the East. That some Jewish Messiah is going to come forth and rescue everything. And obviously, this played a big role, as he puts. He's absolutely right. It's played a big role in eventually the Zealots and the others saying, we can take on Rome. How are you going to take on Rome? How can Israel declare war on Russia? Oh, we can do it. He said, but the odds are against you. Rabim be'ad ma'atim, Tameim be'ad tehorim. The Maccabees did it. Moshe Rabbeinu did it. We can do it. Whoa. Whoa. But I say, well, you could say, oh, you coward. You chicken. You understand? Eventually this will lead to the Bar Kokhba rebellion. Eventually this will lead to the Bar Kokhba rebellion. Obviously there were false messiahs. By the way, if there was a Jesus, meaning putting the historicity of all that sort of thing aside, because there's no actual historical records for this, but putting that aside, it would fit in like a glove to what we know from Josephus about these 40, 50 years prior to the year 70, the outbreak of the war in Rome. Lots of people are stepping forth and claiming Mashiach. Josephus says a guy who says, follow me, like Peter Pan, they're going to fly off the walls of Jerusalem and fly to Rome and bomb it, and they jumped off and they all got killed. And I remember another guy led them into the water saying, if we go with sufficient faith till the water's above our heads, it'll split like it did in the time of Moses, and they all got drowned. And, things like that. There's a funny thing about religion. Anything you say, you'll get some followers. Right? It's weird. Somebody declares himself Mashiach. It's not true that everybody will think he's crazy. Most will think he's crazy. Some will take up. That's the history. That's what history shows us. It's funny. You understand? So anyway, the Zealots that started the war with Rome and continue fighting for. Are we now not in the period of the 3 weeks? What is the 3 weeks? I mentioned the other day. On Shivas B'Tammuz, the beginning of the 3 weeks, the Romans, listen to this, broke into the Temple Mount. So the Roman army was already, having taken most of Jerusalem, was up on the Beis Hamikdash. No, they were in the Temple Mount, and the Jews are in the Beis Hamikdash holding out. Where is this going? Even at that point, the Romans offer them surrender terms. No. Why are you doing that? Where is it going? Even on the 7th or 8th of Av, when the Romans have flattened everything and brought the siege engines up to batter against the wall of the temple itself and to try to take it by storm. So in other words, it's over. No, it's not over. Even when the Romans burned the door down because they torch it and the blood and the gold melts down and then the wood it takes some fire. It's August after all; it's hot and dry. So the front part of the temple is burning. They fight on. Where's it going? This is the dangerous power of messianism. You get it? We just say reality is not something I'm interested in. Remember this as we explore this episode of the Bar Kokhba era. And so, not surprisingly, after the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, after Jerusalem was destroyed, after so many killed and all the rest of it, the sages who saved their lives and gathered in Yavne and a place like that, they try to avoid political discussions. And they seem to have deprecated immediate messianic speculations. I would say this is very typical of the rabbinic model in the Talmud. There's exceptions, but generally speaking, you believe in the Mashiach, but don't ask no questions when, where, and how. You don't even know if you want to be there when it happens. It could be an apocalyptic time, like it says in the book of Daniel. Yesi v'lo yachmini. Let him come. I don't want to be there. Just call me when it's over. Meaning you should definitely not give up hope. Not at all. It's a central belief of the Jewish people. God will do it in his own time. Don't jump the gun, because if you do it wrong, you'll end up like the Zealots. And then when you get hooked in that mentality, you're fighting even though they've taken half the temple and the rest of the country. So it's tricky. I mean, the sages did hold of the concept of Mashiach. It's a very tricky stance, very much reflected in the famous Midrash, or rabbinic teaching, the Agarata, which they encapsulate in the Shir HaShirim, which is the love song between the boy and the girl, or God and Israel. Or what does the love song say? This is the Bible of Satmar, what I'm saying here. Hishbati eschem benos Yerushalayim, I make you swear, daughters of Jerusalem, im ta'iru v'im ta'oru es ho'ahavo ad shetechbatz. Don't push for the consummation of our love until it's ready. Right? Don't get involved in anything premature, however you want to interpret that. But that's what they meant. How do they say it? They say politically. Politically, im ta'iru v'im ta'oru es ho'ahavo ad shetechbatz. It's not just a romantic business. It's a very dangerous political thing. Let it ripen until the situation is correct, and not a second before. And so the great question was, of course, who will be the Messiah? Who will be the Mashiach? Is he already there? Is he waiting, like the Agarata says at the gates of Rome, waiting to be called by God to carry out his mission? And what exactly is the nature and the mission of the Mashiach? Will he simply drive the Romans out and set up a model Torah state? Or will he end history itself and usher in a miraculous era of Tchias HaMesim? Will he be political? Will he be religious? Will he be rational? Will he be mystical? No consensus. Very typical Judaism. We know it's going to happen. Different opinions of how it's going to happen, because the future hasn't happened. One thing the Jews had a consensus on, and listen to this closely, a particularistic Messiah. The Mashiach will be there for the Jews. His task is national. It's the liberation of the Jewish homeland, restoration of the Jewish state, rebuilding of the Jewish temple. And what if the people are not Jewish? Well, they too will benefit, but as a spillover. In other words, the Messianic vision, though it does contain important universalistic elements, it says, the world will be full of knowledge of God like the rivers overflow, like the sea overflows, the line will lie down land. There'll be no more war. There are universalistic aspects to it, but nevertheless, it's primarily a particularistic vision. It's mainly for the Jews. You guys will also benefit. Why aren't you happy that you'll also get? And the answer is, why is it for you? You. What's the business? God likes you. What's that all about? Now, once again, this particularistic utopia was not calculated to win the enthusiastic interest of non-Jews, is it? But the Jewish Jews didn't care about that, and they didn't care how others saw it. If you're a half monotheist, if in general you like Judaism but you don't like Jews, you kind of feel the Messiah is not going to care that much about you, not the way the Jews tell it, because you're not one of the chosen people. On the other hand, the idea of a Messiah, of a heaven-sent person who comes to rid the whole world of all injustice and junk is a powerful one that touches something deep down in every thinking and feeling human being. But why does he have to be so particularistic? Why isn't he equally concerned with Gentiles? Why can't the Messiah be different? Why can't we redesign him and improve him and produce a Messiah who's properly universal? Well, the market share-driven early Christians looking for a recruit did that. That's exactly what they did, didn't they? By the time they finished their evolution, by the time the Christian religion sort of veers off from Judaism, classical Judaism, and crystallizes its message, Jesus will be repackaged not as the king of the Jews, the man will be the next Judah Maccabee or Bar Kokhba, but rather as the savior of mankind. Is he Jewish? Was he a Jew? Well, sort of. I mean, if you say he's divine, then he wasn't even really human, then he wasn't exactly really Jewish. Did you see how it unfolds? Funny. On the other hand, he was born among the Jewish people. On the other hand, the Jews rejected him as a phony. On the other hand, it would be par for the course for the Jews to do that, because the Bible shows us how the Jews are always faithless to their God. And read the Old Testament. On the other hand, the prophets predict a glorious future for the Jewish people with a Davidic monarchy. On the other hand, maybe the term Jewish people needs to be redefined to mean the Christians, etc., etc., etc. And so it was a theologian's paradise. But for the layman, it's just one grand, how does the expression go? 1,000 flowers can bloom. You see what I mean? You see the outlines of the evolution of Christianity away from Judaism as the Christians gain ever and ever greater market share. And look how complicated Judaism is and Jewish history is during this particular period of history. That's what I'm trying to get across tonight. For their part, the Jewish people led by the sages were very hostile to what they regarded as a heresy. The sages were quite aware that in the aftermath of the destruction, with the continuing prosperity of the Roman Empire, which will not go away, the Jewish people will increasingly long for a Mashiach in the traditional Jewish sense. They will long for a Mashiach who will lead the people to miraculous victory over Rome, national liberation, the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash, the return of the Shekhinah, and who knows, maybe the end of evil, maybe the end of time. Resurrection, Tchias HaMesim, who knows? The mood in the Jewish street, and certainly after the immediate impact of the Roman conquest, by the time you get to the 90s, shall we say, the worst is over, it's 20 years in the past. The mood in the Jewish street increasingly, especially in Eretz Yisrael, but in many other places as well, is we want Mashiach now. And it's not a Lubavitch word or anything like that. That's we want Mashiach now, mamish. And it was very powerful out there. And the sages are scared of this. Everybody wants a Mashiach now. But don't let it turn into something that will lead you to destruction once again. Haven't we learned our lesson? But that takes a certain mentality. It also takes being over 30 years old, over 40 years old. Young people don't want to hear that. This is politics. When the people say, we want Mashiach now, it's not religion. Do you get what I'm saying? If you're living in the time of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Gamliel and the others, so they say, we want Mashiach now, that's not religion, that's politics. That's the very thing the sages are straining to avoid, given the present battered state of the Jewish people and the power of the Roman Empire. It's not fun to be a realist, but somebody's got to do it. It's not fun to be an adult, but somebody's got to do it. Can't all be kids. Will the people listen and remain calm and just pray? Or will they get actively Mashiachist? And to hell with what the Romans think.